Let's begin. But let me warn you, this video is not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be soft, and it's certainly not what you want to hear. But it is exactly what you need to hear. Since childhood, you've been trained to look outward, to find blame, to assign names and faces to your suffering. And yes, often that name is your mother's. But here's what almost no one dares to tell you. It's not your mother who's still holding you back. It's what your mind did with her. This isn't about blame or judgment. It's not an attack. It's a truth so uncomfortable that most people will spend their entire lives avoiding it. Your mother lives in your unconscious long after she's left the room. You've tried to move on. You've chased peace. But peace won't come while you're still trapped in a war you haven't even named. And what war is that? The war against an image, a figure that's not flesh and blood anymore, but a shadow, an archetype that lodged itself inside you before you even had the words to define the world around you. And the hardest part? That shadow doesn't leave on its own. Carl Jung called it the mother complex. But don't confuse that with just another psychological label. It's an emotional prison, one with invisible bars. It's the voice that judges you in silence, the emptiness nothing seems to fill, that aching hunger for approval you've carried since you were a child. And the most painful part is, it's not even yours. It's inherited. It's an echo, a mark on the soul, carved so deeply that it feels permanent. So how do you heal something like that? This is where the real work begins, because as long as you keep seeing your mother as an all-powerful figure, whether you're idolizing her or blaming her, you're not actually seeing her. You're seeing a myth, a projection, an image distorted by years of unmet needs, silent wounds, and unspoken resentment. And the hardest truth? That myth still runs your life far more than you're willing to admit. Every decision you make chasing approval, every relationship that crumbles because you're waiting to be saved, every time you can't say no and set boundaries, all of it is rooted far deeper than you think. It's rooted in your childhood, in the glance that never came, in the embrace you were desperate for but never got, in the words that should have been spoken but never were. And now, here you are, an adult on the outside, but deep inside, you're still that child, the one hoping, just hoping, that mom will finally say, everything's going to be okay. But here's the most brutal part. That moment is never going to come. Healing isn't waiting for her to change. Healing is accepting that she might never change. Healing is stopping the wait. And that is devastating. You've been told that forgiveness is the key, that understanding her is the way forward, that you should walk a mile in her shoes. And yes, those things can help, but only if you do the most important thing first. You have to look inward. You have to take full responsibility for your wound. Because the truth is, it's no longer hers. It's yours. Only yours. And no one is coming to heal it for you. Now tell me this. How many times have you caught yourself behaving exactly like her? How many times have you said or done the very things you once swore you'd never repeat? That's the trap. The complex isn't just emotional. It's behavioral. It inhabits you. It drives you. And if you don't become aware of it, it will make you its reflection. The pattern repeats itself again and again until someone finds the courage to break it. And breaking it hurts, because it means killing the illusion. It means giving up the hope that one day what didn't happen will magically happen. It means facing the truth. There will be no perfect closure, no magical repair. Your childhood is gone, And the comfort you didn't receive, you'll have to learn how to give it to yourself. Are you willing to do that? Are you ready to stop waiting to be loved the way you needed and start loving yourself the way you deserve? Because that is the doorway. There is no other. In Jungian terms, the mother isn't just a person. It's an archetype, a symbol. She represents origin, safety, emotional nourishment. But she can also represent suffocation, dependency, the fear of being your authentic self. And when that archetype remains unintegrated, it becomes a shadow you project onto everything. Your partners, your bosses, your friends. You find yourself constantly expecting someone to rescue you, to understand you without words, to take care of you without conditions. But that's not love. That's lack. And lack cannot be filled by another person. It can only be filled by truth, by awareness, by courage. The first step? Stop idealizing her. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't a goddess. But she also wasn't the monster your pain sometimes paints her to be. She was human, wounded, carrying her own invisible wars. She did what she could with what she had. And sometimes, what she had wasn't nearly enough. That doesn't excuse the hurt, but it does explain it. And in that understanding, something softens, not as a forced act of forgiveness, but as a liberation that arises when you finally see clearly. Because idealization is just as toxic as resentment. Both keep you trapped. Both keep you away from what's real. And the reality is this: you no longer need a mother. You need a stronger version of yourself, more conscious, more compassionate. And that version won't show up on its own. You have to build it. Want to know how? Start by watching your reactions. Every time you feel rejected, ask yourself, who am I really seeing right now? The person in front of me, or the wound I haven't healed yet? Every time you demand unconditional love, ask, do I want love, or do I want to repair for what I never got? And right there, in those questions, is where the real work begins. Every time you abandon yourself just so someone else won't, stop and ask, who abandoned me first? Healing isn't linear. It's not pretty. It's not peaceful. Healing is a descent, an unsettling journey into your own personal hell. It's a raw, uncomfortable conversation with your inner child. It's opening the boxes where you buried your memories, digging them up, feeling them fully, and then, only then, letting them go. And yes, sometimes your inner child just cries. But other times, it screams. It sabotages everything. It lashes out in anger. Why? Because that child has been waiting far too long to be heard. So do it. Listen. Don't silence it with feel-good affirmations. Don't try to cover it up with superficial spirituality. Give that child space. Ask what they needed back then. Then, give it to them yourself. Because self-compassion isn't weakness. It's medicine. And when everything else has failed, it's the only remedy left that works. And to practice it, you'll need courage. Because part of you has learned to hate yourself, to blame yourself, to punish yourself the same way others once did. But you can break that cycle. Re-educating yourself emotionally isn't about reading self-help books. It's about learning to see yourself differently, about responding differently. It's about stopping the endless search for motherly love in all the wrong places. Because here's the brutal truth. The world is not going to give you what you didn't receive. It's not designed to heal your childhood wounds. The world will demand from you, judge you, overlook you. And in the middle of that chaos, you will have to build yourself up. Emotional freedom begins the moment you stop repeating the same patterns, when you choose differently, when you finally realize you're not 5 years old anymore. You're not trapped in that house. You don't need someone's touch to feel worthy. You don't need permission to be yourself. But part of you still believes you do. That part is still waiting, still hoping, still silently begging. That part isn't to blame, but you are responsible for healing it. Do it. Not tomorrow. Not when you think you're ready. Do it now. Because if you wait for readiness, you'll never begin. Healing doesn't show up when everything is calm. It comes in the middle of the storm, in the noise, in the fear. And when it does, it doesn't feel like you expected. It feels like loss, like emptiness, like silence. Because healing also means letting go of the version of yourself that you've always known. It means saying goodbye to the victim role. It means no longer waiting and instead taking action. Does it hurt? Yes. But staying where you are hurts even more. So look at yourself, really look, and ask, what part of my suffering still belongs to that inner figure I call mother? How much longer will I let it control me? Make peace. Not with her, with yourself. Because at the end of the day, the most important mother in your life is not the one who raised you. It's the one you choose to become for yourself. And that mother? She hasn't been born yet. Now that you're here, after daring to face what others spend lifetimes avoiding, let me take you deeper still, because there's something we haven't touched yet. A darker layer, hidden, but immensely powerful. Invisible loyalty. Yes, you heard that right. A loyalty you never chose, but one that leads you like a thread woven into your soul. It doesn't matter how far you get, how many books you read, how many therapy sessions you attend. If you don't understand this truth, you'll keep circling back to the same place. Do you want to know the secret trap? Here it is. Your unconscious believes that if you surpass your mother, you betray her. That's how twisted the game is. And don't try to understand it with logic. This isn't about reason. It's imprinted deep within your emotional system, because you grew up believing your identity was tied to hers. That if she suffered, you had to suffer too. That if she believed something, you had to carry it. Without even knowing, you made a pact, a silent vow, an invisible promise that says, I will not be better than you, Mom. I will not be freer than you. I won't fully heal unless you heal first. That's the prison. And the scariest part? That prison looks like love. This isn't about hate. It's not about resentment. It's about unconscious loyalty that binds you to her pain, her frustrations, her limitations. That's why you keep repeating stories that don't make sense. That's why every time you get close to something bigger, something better, you sabotage it. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, if I'm happy and she wasn't, I'm being disloyal. But here's the harsh truth. Your pain doesn't honor her. Your stagnation doesn't save her. Your unhappiness doesn't heal her. So why are you still carrying what was never yours to carry? There's a scene that plays out in countless wounded souls. The child who refuses to fully live, just so they won't hurt the feelings of a mother who's no longer here, or who never really was. As if deep down, they want to say, look, Mom, I suffer too. You're not alone in your sadness. And that is what's slowly killing you. The real betrayal is not in leaving her story behind. The real betrayal is in continuing to relive it. Because if you truly love her, if you truly want to free yourself without dishonoring her, then you must understand one thing. To honor the mother is to outgrow her, not as an act of rebellion, not as rejection, but as evolution. She gave you life. Now it's your turn to multiply it, not shrink it. Turn the pain she passed down into something new, into awareness, into transformation, into an authentic life, a life that finally, truly belongs to you. But for that, you need to break the secret vow, the one you made before you could even speak, the one that says, "I won't be freer than you." Break that promise, not with anger, but with love. Say it silently, even if she's no longer here or can't hear you. "Mum, thank you for what you could give me, but now I'm walking a different path." And that path isn't about resentment, it's about your freedom. Because as long as you remain trapped in that hidden loyalty, everything becomes repetition. You'll repeat her fears, her frustrations, her way of loving, her inability to set boundaries, her need to be accepted, her guilt, her sacrifice, her pain, and you'll do it without even realizing it. Have you noticed how many of your life decisions have been shaped by that shadow? Maybe that's why you can't handle rejection. Maybe that's why you feel guilty when things go well for you. Maybe that's why you choose partners who make you feel small. Not because you're weak, but because you're being loyal. But that loyalty has a steep price, your life. And if you dare to question it, to look it in the eye, something shifts. A strange silence appears. A void opens, because for the first time, you're separating your identity from hers. For the first time, you're saying, "I am not you, and you are not me." And to the child you once were, that feels like abandonment. But to the adult you can become, that's a birth. That's where it all begins. And it's not about cutting ties. It's about redefining the relationship within yourself. Because whether your mother was the most loving, the coldest, the most absent, or the most overprotective, the important thing isn't who she was. The important thing is the role she plays in your psyche. And if you don't put that role in order, it becomes either an altar or a prison. You either idealize her or you become enslaved. But both are the same thing, a distortion. The only way to heal is to dismantle the fantasy. And that fantasy takes many forms: the martyr mother, the perfect mother, the self-sacrificing mother, the ever-present mother. But none of those are real. They're constructs of your mind, myths that keep you from seeing the truth, that she was also a daughter, that she also carried ghosts, that she too was a victim of her time, that she loved in her own way, that she made mistakes, and that you're not here to repeat her fate. You're here for something greater. You're here to transform that emotional inheritance into wisdom, to bring awareness to what was unconscious, to close a cycle. So your children, if you have them or ever do, won't carry what you're carrying now. Because what's inherited isn't objects or even genes. It's unresolved patterns, unprocessed emotions, silenced traumas, the weight of what was never said. And here's the most important part. You can't change the past, but you can change the way the past lives inside you. Do it. Not for her, for you. You don't need to break with your mother. You need to break with the distorted archetype you carry inside. You need to silence the voice that judges you every time you shine. You need to challenge the guilt you feel every time you choose yourself. And that liberation isn't against her. It's for you. Because your original wound does not define your destiny. What you do with it does. So here's the final question. How much longer will you keep worshipping a pattern that no longer serves you? How much longer will you carry a story that didn't even begin with you? The time has come to turn that inherited pain into fuel, to stop surviving and start living. But for that, you need one thing: courage. Courage to let go of loyalty. Courage to rebuild yourself without that figure who either gave you everything or nothing at all. Courage to look in the mirror and say, "Now, I'm the one who takes care of me." And when you do, when you choose yourself, when you finally set yourself free, then, and only then, will you truly be honoring your mother. Because the greatest tribute you can offer to the one who gave you life is to actually live it. And just when you think you've finally let go, when you believe you've broken that internal loyalty, something else shows up, more subtle, harder to detect, more deceitful: emotional self-abandonment. And yes, it's directly linked to the mother archetype still alive in your shadow. Because what does a child do when they don't receive the emotional care they need? They adapt, they go quiet, they learn to ignore themselves, they learn to repress, to pretend it doesn't hurt. And that survival skill becomes, years later, your way of life. Have you noticed how you treat yourself? How you speak to yourself inside? How you demand things of yourself you'd never demand from someone you love? That's no coincidence. It's the continuation of the same pattern. It's how that misaligned archetype expresses itself within you, repeating the abandonment, but now from the inside. And here comes the cruelest part of this story. No one is hurting you now. You're the one still doing it, in the name of an old program. Every time you deny yourself rest, every time you minimize your pain, every time you betray yourself just to avoid making others uncomfortable, every time you accept the unacceptable out of fear of not being loved, you're repeating the same script. If I ignore myself, maybe they'll love me. Do you realize what that means? It means you learn to survive by emotionally disappearing. And that's a slow, invisible, silent massacre. You've become your own authoritarian figure, the one who won't let you cry, the one who demands strength, who pushes you to perform, to give, to support everyone except yourself. And you know what's the most twisted part? The more you abandon yourself, the more you hope someone will come and rescue you. But that's not going to happen, because no one can give you what you're not giving yourself. So here's the real revolution. Start caring for yourself the way no one ever did. Be your own inner mother. Re-educate yourself from scratch. Learn to give yourself the affection you were denied, to allow yourself to feel without judgment, to speak to yourself kindly when you fall, to stop demanding perfection when all you need is comfort. And yes, at first, it will feel strange, because for years, you've been used to the whip, the criticism, the emotional coldness, but none of that is truly yours. It's borrowed software, a system you inherited, not because it works, but because it was all you ever knew. Want to break that cycle? Start by asking yourself this: how would I treat a child who just went through what I've been through? What would I say to a kid who feels defeated, exhausted, on the edge of collapse? Would I push them harder, call them weak, or would I hold them, asking for nothing in return? And now realize this: that child is you. Yes, even now, whether you're 30, 40, or 50 years old, even if you've grown tough, even if it looks like you've got everything under control, that child is still there, still waiting. But no one's coming. Not the way you imagine. Because this isn't about finding the perfect savior. It's about becoming the person you always needed. And this isn't some shallow, mystical idea. It's deep psychology. Jung knew it well. What we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. And this truth hits hard here. If you don't make your self-abandonment conscious, you'll repeat it again and again, in every relationship, in every job, in every decision. You'll keep living from lack, from emotional hunger, from the desperation to be rescued. And here's the paradox: you stop needing to be saved the moment you become your own safe place. Is it hard? Of course it is. No one taught you how. They taught you how to compete, how to perform, how to impress, but no one showed you how to hold your inner world, let alone embrace your shadows. And that brings us to another forgotten piece, the negative inner mother. That voice inside you, that one isn't yours, the one that says you're not enough, that you're late, that you don't deserve it, that you should be more, feel less. That voice isn't you, but you've mistaken it for your own. It's an internalized figure, a distorted archetypal energy that's taken over the space where your self-worth should live. And until you dismantle it, you'll keep thinking you're your own worst enemy, but you're not. You're just repeating what you were taught. So how do you dismantle it? By listening to it. Yes, listening. Because what you resist persists, but what you observe transforms. The next time that voice appears, don't run, don't shut it down, don't try to paint over it with hollow affirmations. Look at it, ask it, where do you come from? Who do you belong to? What are you repeating to me that was never mine in the first place? And then you'll see it. You'll see the strings. You'll see the origin. And in that moment, something inside you will awaken, not as a mystical epiphany, but as a fierce clarity. You'll realize you've been living trapped inside a narrative you never even questioned. And the moment you question it, you take your power back. That's the real psychological awakening. Not mantras, not gurus. This moment. The instant you stop being the echo of your childhood and start becoming the author of your adult life. But be careful, not to confuse this with cheap positivity. This isn't about ignoring the pain. It's about taking responsibility, about seeing yourself without filters, about no longer begging someone else to fill your emptiness, and instead learning to fill it with your own small, conscious acts. Want a starting point? Here it is. Don't abandon yourself when you need yourself most. When you're tired, don't push harder. Rest. When you're sad, don't judge yourself. Stay close. When you're scared, don't feel ashamed. Listen. That's the new language, the new inner mothering, the new emotional architecture that finally breaks generations of inherited patterns. And yes, it sounds massive, overwhelming even. But remember this, you don't have to do it perfectly, you just have to do it differently. Because if you don't break the cycle, no one else will. The change you're waiting for isn't out there. It lives in each internal gesture, in every moment you choose to care for yourself, even when you don't feel like it, in every boundary you set, even when your voice shakes, in every no you say so you can finally say yes to yourself. That's what real love looks like. And whether you believe it or not, that is an act of rebellion. Because in a world that teaches you to push, punish, compare, choosing to treat yourself with gentleness is subversive. It's looking your family history in the eye and saying, it ends with me, not because you're better, not because you're stronger, but because you've chosen to wake up. And once you wake up, nothing can put you back to sleep. Not the judgment, not the guilt, not that old voice that once froze you. Because you no longer walk through life begging for approval. You move from within, from a new route, a route built with awareness, with boundaries, with real love. Not love that demands, not love that sacrifices, love that holds, love that respects, love that nurtures. The kind of love you always deserved and can now give to yourself. And that, though it may not seem like it, is the only inheritance worth passing on. And if you've made it this far, something in you has already shifted. You don't need anyone to confirm it. You feel it. It's that subtle vibration that appears when you finally look at what you've been avoiding your whole life. It's that strange mix of emptiness and power, of grief and rebirth. Because yes, the end of this journey isn't some internal applause or magical enlightenment. It's a silence, a new silence, a clean silence, because you finally dared to break the noise of what was passed down to you. And now you understand why there were so many moments when you didn't really know who you were. Why was it so hard for you to be at peace with yourself? Because you were living a life filled with voices that didn't belong to you. Expectations that were never yours to carry, needs you didn't come into this world with, reactions born from a pain passed down through generations. You were a container of echoes, shadows, burdens, but not anymore. What remains now is yours, your space, your identity, your voice. And that right there is where things begin to get truly interesting. This isn't about living without wounds. It's about, for the first time, living with them, consciously, fully aware. And that awareness changes everything. Because the wounds were never the real problem. The real issue was always your attempt to outrun them, to cover them up, to act like they didn't exist, hoping they would vanish if you just never spoke of them. But they don't disappear. They morph. They deepen. They root themselves in silence. They transform only when you face them, speak them aloud, and walk through them without flinching. And right at that final crossing, at the point where you're no longer hiding, something new is born. A kind of emotional maturity that isn't about being in control or pretending to be untouched by life. It's the kind that accepts that, within you, broken parts and wise parts coexist, that there are still parts of you that cry, and parts that have learned how to hold and soothe the pain. And do you know what that really means? It means you've crossed a threshold, a sacred line of no return, where you stop being a symbolic child of your past and become the symbolic parent of your present. You no longer live from what was missing. You live from what you now choose to create. And that kind of power, that is rare, because it requires fierce courage, ruthless honesty, and an almost untamed willingness to let go of excuses, justifications, inherited fears, and begin to live from within, from the depths, not from the hollow echo of some old narrative. And now that you know this, what will you do with it? Because this is where the video ends, but where the real journey begins. The invisible part, the quiet transformation, the part no one else will see, but you will feel, every day, in every choice, in every new way you learn to treat yourself. Each time you choose not to repeat the old pattern. Each time you act from awareness instead of lack. And even if nobody applauds you for it, even if no one sees your silent victories, know this: that kind of freedom, it's priceless. It cannot be bought. So I'll leave you with one last thought, one that might wrap everything you've just heard into a single sentence. A sentence to keep close, to whisper when it's hard, to tattoo on your soul if needed. When self-love is born from healed pain, it stops being a trend and becomes a quiet revolution. And if you've made it this far, let me know in the comments. I want to know who among you didn't just watch, but dared to feel every word. Type it out. I am the end of the pattern. Because if you've arrived here to the very end, then you are no longer the same. You've seen something most people never even dare to glance at. And if this stirred something in you, made you think, made you feel, then subscribe, not for me, but for you. Because we're not here to entertain egos, We're here to awaken souls, and the journey is only just beginning. Turn on that little bell icon, because what's coming next? It's going to hurt, but it's going to free you. I'll see you in the next video. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll just meet yourself again, in the echo of what you've just heard. Either way, something in you has awakened, and that, my friend, is irreversible. Now go, do something that scares you just a little. Speak to yourself in a way you never have before. Sit in silence. Cry if you must. Or look at yourself in the mirror without judgment for just 10 seconds. 10. That's enough to begin. Because when you change the way you treat yourself, the world changes the way it responds to you. And if you don't believe it, try it. But do it from that place, deep down, where you no longer need to be rescued. Because now, finally, you know you were the savior all along. Until then, may the world tremble when you begin to live without repeating what once broke you. I'll see you again, maybe. Or maybe you'll be too busy rebuilding yourself, piece by conscious piece. Either way, I'm glad you made it this far. To this moment, to yourself, to now. Do you believe that the only way to overcome fear is by confronting it head-on? If so, it's time to question everything you've been told. This widely accepted idea that fear must be conquered through brute force is not only flawed, but might be the very reason you've been feeling stuck for so long. Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century, shared a radically different perspective, one that has the power to change everything. According to Jung, fear is not something that should be defeated or vanquished. Instead, it must be understood. And here lies the greatest misunderstanding. As long as you keep trying to beat fear using the wrong approach, it will continue to dominate you from the shadows. But there's something no one has probably told you before. Within your fear lies the hidden key to your deepest freedom. It's not about bravery. It's not about strength. What you need is something far more profound: awareness. So if you think you already know how to handle fear, pause for a moment and think again. Because in the next few minutes, you'll uncover why almost everything you thought you knew about fear is incomplete or even completely wrong. And more importantly, how a simple shift in perception could change the way you experience life forever. Let's start with a question. What is the fear that challenges you the most right now? Think about it, reflect, and if you're ready, share it in the comments. That act of sharing, of expressing it outwardly, is often the very first step toward real understanding and transformation. Fear isn't just an emotion. It's a message, a signal that there's something essential within us we've been avoiding. Every time we run away from fear, every time we pretend it's not there, we're actually rejecting a part of ourselves. Carl Jung didn't see fear as an enemy. He saw it as a messenger from the unconscious mind, carrying truths that are often difficult to face but impossible to ignore forever. How many times have you heard the phrase, "face your fears," or "just push through it"? Society conditions us to believe that fear is an obstacle to be overcome, that courage alone can make it vanish. But ask yourself honestly, how well has that worked? How many times has fear returned, perhaps stronger than before, even after you thought you had conquered it? Jung offers a different path, one that is more demanding, but also more transformative. He believed that fear is not a wall to break through. It's a signpost. It points to the parts of our psyche that are asking, sometimes desperately, to be seen. These are parts we've buried, rejected, or hidden away. Sometimes they're dark, painful, or shameful. But Jung taught that these elements are also the seeds of our wholeness, if we're willing to engage with them. This is where the real paradox lies. Fear often protects us from confronting the very aspects of ourselves that we need to integrate in order to grow. It acts like a guardian, standing at the gates of our inner shadow, the side of the self where we hide everything we've labeled as unacceptable, weak, embarrassing, or unworthy. Yet only by turning toward that shadow can we become whole. Jung called this process individuation. Individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming the truest version of yourself. It requires not the suppression of fear, but its exploration. Not running from the dark, but walking through it with awareness. The purpose isn't to destroy what frightens you, but to understand what it reveals. Fear for Jung was not just an inconvenient feeling. It was a compass. It appeared when we strayed from our path, when we disconnected from our essence. Instead of being an obstacle, it was a guide, one that, if listened to, could lead us back to authenticity. And this is precisely why the modern mindset fails us. We've been trained to see fear as something purely negative. We're told to avoid it, distract ourselves from it, or crush it with willpower. But this approach fails time and time again. Why? Because it never addresses what fear truly is, a profound signal from the unconscious, asking for your attention, your presence, and your compassion. Take anxiety, for example. Today, we treat anxiety as a symptom to be eliminated. We medicate it, suppress it, distract ourselves from it. But Jung would invite us to ask, what is this anxiety trying to show me? What am I not willing to face? What deeper truth lies beneath this unease? The same applies to phobias, irrational fears, or that persistent, undefinable discomfort that seems to follow us through life. These feelings are not random. They're not failures. They are reflections of an inner landscape that's asking to be explored. And here's something even more fascinating. Fear is not only a personal experience, it's also collective. Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of knowledge, memories, and archetypes that belong to all humanity. According to this view, your personal fears often mirror deeper, universal fears, patterns that exist across all cultures and all of history. For instance, the fear of death is not yours alone. It is woven into the human condition. It reflects one of the most ancient and powerful archetypes we carry, the awareness of our finiteness. Likewise, the fear of rejection or abandonment can often be traced to the maternal archetype, which represents our primal longing for safety, nurture, and belonging. Understanding that your fears are not just your own, but are shared by billions across time and space, can bring a deep sense of connection. Your fear is not a flaw, it is a mirror of what it means to be human. And recognizing that can help you approach your fears not with judgment, but with curiosity and compassion. To begin understanding fear from Jung's perspective, we must first understand the structure of the human psyche as he described it. Jung didn't see the mind as a single unit. He described it as a complex system of conscious and unconscious parts, each playing a vital role. The ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self, the collective unconscious. These are all elements within you, influencing your behavior, your emotions, and yes, your fears. When fear arises, it is often the unconscious calling out to be acknowledged. It could be an unresolved wound from childhood, a repressed memory, a neglected part of your identity. It could even be something you inherited through generations, passed down silently, but still alive within you. That's why simply confronting fear as if it were an enemy to defeat doesn't work. You can't conquer what you haven't yet understood. You can't silence what you refuse to hear. Jung teaches us that real freedom comes not from overpowering fear, but from decoding its message. Carl Jung divided the human mind into three main components: the conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Fear, he explained, often seeps into all of these layers, manifesting in forms that range from clearly visible to deeply hidden and obscure. On the conscious level, fear tends to be straightforward and recognizable. It is the fear of failing an important presentation, the fear of physical harm, or the fear of losing someone we love. These fears seem simple because they are tied to specific, tangible situations. However, Jung believed that conscious fear often acts merely as the tip of the iceberg. It is a visible symptom of far deeper issues buried in the unconscious. For example, a person might believe they are simply afraid of public speaking, but that fear might not come from the act of speaking itself. It might be rooted in an earlier experience of humiliation, rejection, or ridicule that now lies dormant in the personal unconscious. According to Jung, the personal unconscious is the reservoir of all that we have repressed or forgotten. It is here that painful memories, traumas, and parts of ourselves we consider unacceptable reside. Fear frequently emerges as a defense mechanism, a kind of psychological guardian that rises to protect these sensitive contents. Jung described a particular element of the unconscious called the shadow. The shadow is where all the qualities we deny, reject, or fail to integrate into our conscious identity are stored. It is here that fear often finds its most powerful source. Consider someone who constantly tries to appear strong and confident. Such a person may harbor an overwhelming fear of vulnerability. But this fear is not merely about vulnerability itself. It represents something deeper. It points to a disowned part of the self, a fragment buried within the shadow that the individual cannot face or accept. And the more we deny these darker aspects of ourselves, the more intensely fear tends to grow. It becomes louder and more persistent, almost as if trying to warn us that we are becoming disconnected from essential parts of who we really are. Yet, as Jung observed, most people tend to ignore these internal warnings. They prefer quick fixes, temporary distractions, or external solutions that do not truly address the root of the problem. Beyond the personal unconscious, Jung also proposed the idea of the collective unconscious, a deeper, universal layer of the psyche. In this realm lie archetypes, symbolic patterns of behavior and experience shared across all cultures and historical periods. Many of these archetypes are closely linked to fear. Take, for instance, the archetype of the hero. The hero represents courage and triumph, but the hero's journey is always marked by encounters with the unknown and with terror. The hero must face monsters, descend into the underworld, and confront inner demons before emerging transformed. These monsters are not literal. They are symbolic representations of the universal fears that all humans must grapple with at some point in their lives. Another central archetype is the shadow itself. The shadow doesn't just represent the repressed material within an individual. It also symbolizes what is collectively denied or hidden by societies. The fear of the shadow is universal because it embodies both our hidden potential and our deepest inner conflicts. To face the shadow is to confront what makes us most uncomfortable, what we are most unwilling to admit. And yet Jung believed this confrontation was essential. He argued that the ultimate purpose of life is individuation, the process of integrating every part of our psyche to become a truly whole and authentic person. Fear, according to Jung, is an unavoidable part of this journey. It shows up as a signal, a whisper from the soul, telling us that we are approaching something important, something that might be painful or challenging, but also necessary for our growth. Consider the case of someone who constantly feels afraid to change careers, even though they are deeply unhappy in their current profession. That fear might not only stem from rational concerns like financial insecurity or the fear of the unknown. It could also reflect a deeper inner conflict, a tug-of-war between the longing for stability and the desire for personal fulfillment. The fear is not the enemy. In Jung's view, it is a messenger. He likened facing fear to entering a dark cave. At first, the darkness is terrifying. But once we step inside, we may discover hidden treasures, insights, strengths, and truths about ourselves that were previously inaccessible. One of Jung's most profound ideas was that fear often arrives as a sign that transformation is near. It appears when we are ready to evolve, but still resistant to change. Take the example of a midlife crisis, something Jung studied in great depth. At a certain stage of life, many people begin to feel an overwhelming and unsettling fear. It is the fear of aging, the fear of losing relevance, or the fear of having lived without fulfilling one's true potential. This type of fear cannot and should not be dismissed. In fact, Jung's approach becomes most powerful precisely in these moments. He taught that we should not run from such discomfort, but dive into it. In this context, fear is not an obstacle to be removed. It is a gateway. It is an invitation to go inward and explore the territories we have long avoided. But modern culture often offers a different message. Today's world is obsessed with eliminating fear as quickly and painlessly as possible. Countless books, motivational speeches, and self-help gurus promise to help us conquer fear in 5 easy steps or banish anxiety forever. But Jung's philosophy invites us to ask a much deeper question. What if fear is not a problem to solve, but a teacher to listen to? Fear may be the most honest emotion we have. It tells us where we are wounded, where we are stuck, and where we need to grow. It reveals the parts of our psyche that are fragmented or hidden. And if we dare to follow it, not as victims, but as curious explorers, it can guide us to the very core of who we are. In doing so, fear becomes sacred. It becomes the threshold we must cross to discover our wholeness, to embrace our contradictions, and to step fully into the mystery of being human. For Jung, these superficial approaches to fear are ultimately ineffective. Fear doesn't simply vanish because we choose to ignore it, nor does it disappear when we try to suppress it with quick-fix techniques. Instead, what happens is that fear finds new ways to express itself. It becomes anxiety, emotional stagnation, or even manifests through physical symptoms. The only path to genuine transformation begins when we give ourselves permission to explore the true source of our fear. This is not easy. It demands courage. But more than that, it requires patience and a deep sense of self-compassion. Jung believed that fear is directly linked to freedom, not because we need to conquer it in order to be free, but because true freedom comes when we understand what lies behind our fears. When we confront them head-on, we uncover hidden truths about ourselves, truths that had remained buried beneath the surface. These revelations liberate us from automatic behaviors and thought patterns. They allow us to make more conscious decisions and to live a life that is aligned with our most authentic self. Now that we've explored the profound nature of Jung's perspective on fear, it's time to bring these ideas down to earth, into our everyday lives. After all, theory only becomes meaningful when it is lived. So, let's turn to real-life examples, stories that illustrate how fear operates in our lives in subtle yet powerful ways. Take the case of Mariana. She was a highly successful professional. She had everything that most people dream of: a stable career, public recognition, and an admirable social circle. But every time she was asked to take on new challenges, like leading an important project or speaking in public, she would be seized by a paralyzing fear. She explained it away by saying that she simply didn't like being the center of attention. But during a Jungian therapy session, a deeper truth began to surface. Mariana's fear wasn't truly about external attention. It was about the fear of being seen as imperfect. From a young age, she had learned that making mistakes was unacceptable. Every failure brought her shame, and she worked hard to never repeat them. But the part of her psyche, filled with insecurity and doubt, didn't disappear. It was merely repressed. As an adult, her shadow took the shape of a deep fear of situations that might expose her flaws. When Mariana finally began to explore this hidden part of herself, she came to understand that her obsessive pursuit of perfection was limiting her life. She realized that fear, rather than something to eliminate, was actually an invitation to accept her own humanity, flaws and all. And that realization was deeply liberating. Now consider Raphael, a talented artist who spent years without creating anything new. He told himself that he just wasn't inspired, but deep down, he knew that the real issue was his fear of being judged. When Raphael explored this block through Jung's framework, he uncovered something profound. He wasn't actually afraid of what others thought of his art. What terrified him was his own inner critic. He had projected his own harsh judgments onto the world around him. Within his shadow, there was a critical voice constantly whispering that he would never be good enough. Raphael's fear wasn't about others, it was about himself. He realized that to move forward, he had to face and integrate this hidden part of his psyche. Once he did, he began to create again, not for approval, but as an act of personal truth and expression. Jung often used symbolic imagery to describe the process of confronting fear. One of his most powerful metaphors is that of the dark cave. Fear is like a shadowy, intimidating entrance we avoid. Yet, within that cave lies the treasure we are seeking. This image reminds us that fear isn't just a barrier. It's a signal, a sign that something meaningful is hidden beneath. For Mariana, the treasure was self-acceptance, learning to embrace her imperfections. For Raphael, it was the freedom to create without fear of judgment. Fear, as we see, is not only a personal challenge, but also plays a central role in our relationships with others. Think of the fear of abandonment, one of the deepest and most common emotional wounds. It can drive someone to avoid emotional connection entirely, guarding themselves against potential rejection. Or it can lead to controlling behaviors, desperate to prevent the other person from leaving. Jung would see this as the manifestation of the archetype of the wounded lover. This archetype represents not just the longing for love and connection, but also the emotional scars left by past experiences. In this light, the fear of abandonment is not just a relational issue. It's a mirror reflecting unresolved wounds. And when someone has the courage to face this fear and dig into its origins, they often discover patterns of behavior and core beliefs that have kept them stuck. What once seemed like a problem in a relationship turns out to be a profound opportunity for personal healing. So how do we begin to work with fear in our everyday lives? It starts with awareness. We must learn to identify fear and bring the theory into practice. Ask your fear questions. When you feel fear, instead of reacting automatically, pause and ask, what is this fear trying to tell me? This simple question can open the door to deep insight. Observe repeating patterns. What kinds of situations tend to trigger fear in you? These patterns usually point to areas of life you're avoiding. Write about your fears. Putting your fears into words, writing down what you feel and why you think you feel it, can be a powerful way to access parts of the unconscious mind. Reflect on your shadow. Ask yourself, what aspects of myself do I reject or avoid? Fear is often connected to these exiled parts of the self. As we've seen through the examples of Mariana and Raphael, fear, though uncomfortable, also carries the potential for liberation. They only found freedom once they stopped running and turned to face what they had avoided for so long. This path, though difficult, is what Jung referred to as the hero's journey. The collective unconscious, as defined by Jung, is the deepest layer of the human psyche. It's a repository of experiences accumulated by humanity over countless generations. It contains the archetypes, universal patterns that represent the core aspects of existence. Fear, in this context, is not just a fleeting emotion. It is an echo of these archetypal forces. For instance, fear of the unknown is a theme that appears in every culture. It surfaces in myths of monsters, uncharted lands, and epic journeys. This fear corresponds to what Jung called the collective shadow, all that is unknown and unintegrated, both individually and socially. He believed that archetypal fears are embedded in our psyche because they reflect existential challenges shared by all human beings: fear of death, fear of failure, fear of rejection. These fears are universal, and yet deeply personal. Among the archetypes most closely tied to fear, we find the hero and the dragon. The hero archetype represents the individual who must face fear, symbolized by the dragon. This confrontation isn't just about slaying a beast. It's about integrating parts of the self that have been hidden or denied. The shadow, as discussed earlier, is the archetype that holds everything we repress. Fear of the shadow is the fear of facing our own limitations, flaws, and untapped potential. The wise old man is the archetype of guidance and understanding, but he demands that we face difficult truths. His fear is the fear of reality itself, stripped of illusion. Then there's the terrible father archetype, representing oppressive authority and judgment. Fear of this figure can appear as fear of failure or the sense of never being good enough. Just as archetypes shape our individual psychology, they also influence entire societies. In times of crisis, like war, pandemics, or social upheaval, archetypal fears rise to the surface. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, we saw global expressions of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of illness, fear of change. These weren't just rational responses. They were also symbolic reflections of deep archetypal anxieties awakening in the collective unconscious. Jung believed that such crises offer an opening for collective transformation. Fear, in these moments, forces individuals and societies to confront their shadows, what they have ignored or denied. The path forward, according to Jung, is not avoidance, but integration. And integration involves three fundamental steps. First, recognition, acknowledging fear as a legitimate and natural part of the human experience. Second, exploration, investigating the roots of the fear, both personal and archetypal, asking what the fear is trying to teach or reveal. Third, transformation, using fear as a catalyst for growth. This might involve confronting challenges, shifting behaviors, or adopting new perspectives. A powerful metaphor for this process is found in the hero's journey, a pattern not only described by Jung, but expanded upon by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. At the heart of this journey lies the confrontation with fear, the symbolic dragon. In facing the dragon, the hero doesn't just overcome a threat. He or she uncovers new dimensions of selfhood. This journey represents the process of individuation, integrating the dark, transcending internal limitations, and emerging wiser and more complete. And yet, despite the power of fear to guide us, most people avoid it. That's because facing fear often brings discomfort, even pain. But within that discomfort lies transformation, and beyond the dragon, the treasure. Jung pointed out that our resistance to personal growth often doesn't present itself in loud or obvious ways. Instead, it frequently hides in plain sight, disguised as denial, procrastination, or a compulsive search for quick fixes that do nothing but cover up the deeper problem. These surface-level behaviors, according to Jung, are not random or meaningless. They are, in fact, manifestations of what he called the shadow, those unconscious parts of ourselves that we ignore, suppress, or outright reject. He believed this resistance to change was deeply symbolic. It reflected a profound inner reluctance to leave behind the familiar, even if that familiarity is riddled with dissatisfaction or emotional stagnation. Take, for instance, the fear of changing careers. So many people remain stuck in jobs that drain them, that bring no joy or purpose. On the surface, it might look like laziness or indecision, but Jung would argue otherwise. He would say that this fear represents an inner doorway, an opportunity to explore what truly matters to the individual. It's not just fear, it's the first challenge on the path of transformation. The resistance in these situations is not a dead end, but rather the beginning of something new, something potentially life-changing. Although archetypes are universal patterns that live within the collective unconscious, the way they manifest is deeply personal. Each individual experiences these symbolic energies in their own way. Therefore, it becomes crucial to understand how fear shows up in your daily life. Jung encouraged self-inquiry as a way to bring unconscious patterns into awareness. He might have posed questions like, what do I consistently avoid? Which situations make me anxious or uncomfortable? What behavioral patterns do I repeat that seem rooted in fear? Are there any recurring themes in my dreams that provoke fear or unease? Such reflective questions are more than just psychological exercises. They are keys that can unlock hidden doors within the psyche. When we begin to explore fear through the lens of the unconscious and the archetypal, we come to see that fear is not merely a nuisance or a weakness. Instead, it becomes a sacred portal, one that can lead us to profound inner change. Jung reminded us that when fear is approached with both courage and curiosity, it has the potential to become one of our greatest teachers. We've now reached what may seem like the end of this journey, but as Jung so eloquently expressed, Every ending is also the beginning of something else. The intention here is not to banish fear from your life, but to evolve your relationship with it. Rather than viewing it as the enemy, we can begin to see fear as an unexpected ally. This, according to Jung, was the true essence of transformation. Recognizing fear not as a roadblock to growth, but as a bridge to a more integrated, authentic version of ourselves. When we consciously examine our fears, we realize they are much more than inconvenient emotional states. They are signals, pointing us toward areas in our lives that demand greater attention and care. For example, consider the fear of loneliness. On the surface, it might feel like something to escape, but if we look more deeply, it can reveal a yearning for deeper connection, not just with others, but with ourselves. Or take the fear of failure, which so many of us carry. This often indicates that we've linked our self-worth too closely with external achievements rather than with our intrinsic value. Jung saw fear as a messenger from the unconscious. It tends to arise precisely when something within us is yearning to be acknowledged, integrated, and understood. Fear doesn't show up arbitrarily. It appears when we're at a crossroads, when we're ready, though not always willing, to step beyond the known into new territory. Each time you feel afraid, it is an invitation to ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What is this fear trying to teach me? The path of individuation, the journey to becoming who you truly are, requires the integration of all aspects of the psyche, especially those parts we usually reject or fear. Fear, in this context, becomes a compass. It doesn't mislead. It points us toward the very parts of ourselves that are still waiting to be explored, accepted, and embraced. And when you begin to treat fear not as a threat, but as a guide, the journey to wholeness becomes far clearer. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a major life decision, moving to a new city, starting a new relationship, or leaving behind an old identity. Fear inevitably arises. It whispers warnings, urging you to stay in your comfort zone. But if you look more closely, you'll see that fear is guarding something valuable, something your soul knows you need to encounter. Throughout this reflection, we've returned again and again to a single idea. Fear is not something to be quickly overcome or brushed aside. It deserves your attention. It must be accepted, examined, and understood. Jung famously said, "What you resist persists." And indeed, when we resist fear, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It grows stronger and often re-emerges in unexpected ways. Anxiety, self-sabotaging behaviors, or even inner conflict. But when we face it directly and trace it to its roots, its power over us begins to dissolve. Freedom, in this psychological and spiritual context, does not mean the absence of fear. Rather, it means the conscious choice to move forward even with fear present. It means having the courage to step into the unknown while acknowledging that fear is walking beside you, not as your captor, but as your companion. To close this exploration, here are some Jung-inspired practices that can help you build a new relationship with fear, one rooted in understanding and transformation. First, initiate a dialogue with your fear. When you feel afraid, don't run from it. Sit with it. Ask, what am I truly afraid of? Write down your answers. Don't rush. Let your curiosity guide you. Next, explore shadow integration. Ask yourself, what parts of me have I been avoiding? Which aspects of myself do I dislike, hide, or deny? Fear often emerges from these shadow aspects, pieces of ourselves we've deemed unworthy or dangerous. But these parts are not your enemies. They are wounded messengers, work on accepting them. Give them a seat at the table. You can also use your dreams as a guide. Jung believed that dreams are direct messages from the unconscious. If you dream about frightening or uncomfortable scenarios, don't ignore them. Analyze them. What symbols appear? What emotions arise? Your dreams may contain crucial clues about what you're neglecting in your waking life. Finally, connect with your archetypes. Reflect on which archetypal energies are active in your life. Are you in the role of the hero, setting off on a quest? Are you encountering the shadow, facing the unknown? Or perhaps the wise old man or woman is whispering guidance. These inner figures aren't just myths. They are mirrors, helping you understand how to walk through fear with purpose. And perhaps the most powerful practice of all, walk toward discomfort. When fear tells you to retreat, challenge yourself to take even the smallest step forward. This doesn't mean plunging into chaos. It means daring to approach what lies on the other side of your resistance. Remember, fear is not just an emotion to be managed. It is a message to be decoded. It reflects the landscape of your inner world, and it calls you toward integration, wholeness, and self-actualization. Jung's vision of fear is revolutionary because it invites us to move from victimhood to empowerment. Instead of seeing fear as something that holds us back, we can begin to see it as something that propels us forward. Above all, remember, fear is universal, but the way you choose to face it defines the quality of your life's journey. Jung left us a map, but no two paths are alike. You will never truly transcend fear unless you first understand that it is not your enemy. It is the messenger. It is the guardian of the cave where your greatest treasure lies. Carl Jung showed us that fear isn't something we need to run from, but something we must embrace as a vital part of the soul's journey toward individuation. So the next time fear rises, don't turn away. Greet it with curiosity and courage. Ask it what it's trying to show you. And in doing so, you won't just transform your fear, you'll transform yourself. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who might need it. There's so much more to explore in the depths of the psyche, and our upcoming videos will take you even further on this transformative journey. Stay curious, stay courageous, and we'll see you in the next one. Imagine this. You are sitting in a silent room. The walls are bare. The clock has stopped ticking. And although everything around you seems calm, inside of you, there's a deafening noise. It's not physical. It doesn't come from outside. It's ancient, intangible pressure. A persistent echo that you can't trace back to a specific moment, but it's always there. Like an invisible weight, your soul has been dragging for centuries. A burden that nobody else can see, but that you feel every second of every day. You've read all the books about money. You've repeated affirmations. You've taken courses, followed step-by-step systems, drawn mental maps, tried every strategy out there. You've pushed yourself beyond exhaustion. You've said yes when every fiber of your being screamed no. You've settled for crumbs, hoping the universe would eventually reward your obedience with abundance. But it never came. Not really. And the most frustrating part is, you don't know why. You did everything right. You followed the rules. And still, inside, you feel broken. Maybe you can't even put into words what you feel. All you know is that every time something good seems to be getting close, some part of you pushes it away. You sabotage it. It's not loud. It's not obvious. It's a whisper, barely audible, that says, "You're not enough. You don't deserve this. You weren't born to have so much." And you obey, not consciously, not rationally, but energetically. You step back, you shrink, you self-sabotage, you hide, and the cycle repeats itself again and again. Now listen carefully. What if the real issue was never about money? What if the true obstacle isn't your bank account, your skill set, or your environment, but a deep, untreated wound buried in your soul? What if, from the deepest part of your being, you are the one rejecting the prosperity you claim to desire? Not because you're unaware, but because you're unconsciously loyal to your pain. Carl Jung, one of the deepest explorers of the human psyche, once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And what if this so-called fate, the bad luck, the lack of opportunities, the injustice, is nothing more than a mirror reflecting a part of your soul that's been broken for a long time? A part that from a very young age learned that love hurts, that success is dangerous, that being seen is unsafe. A part that was wounded and never learned to trust again. And so, year after year, you built an identity based on survival. A version of yourself that doesn't want to be rich, that doesn't want to be free, that doesn't want to shine. It just wants to feel safe. But here lies the contradiction. You cannot be free and safe at the same time. Prosperity demands exposure. Abundance requires openness. And a wounded soul doesn't want to open. It wants to hide. It wants to protect itself. It wants to disappear. So let me ask you, and answer with brutal honesty. Have you ever felt guilty for wanting more? Have you ever sabotaged yourself right when you were about to succeed? Do you feel like there's something deep inside of you that simply won't allow you to receive? If the answer is yes, then maybe, just maybe, you're not broken. Maybe you're just fragmented. And that's where the most dangerous and transformative question begins. What part of me believes that being poor is safer than being free? And am I truly willing to go deep enough to find it? This isn't a video about money techniques. This isn't about shallow motivation or magical thinking. This isn't about attracting wealth by repeating empty positive phrases. This is a descent, an exploration into what's really holding you back. A raw and honest gaze into your shadow. The one Jung said holds all the parts of yourself you've rejected in order to be accepted by others. That shadow is now demanding to be seen, because as long as you avoid looking at it, it will keep silently steering your life. And if you dare to look honestly, you will understand. Your soul isn't just wounded, it's closed, and a door that's locked from the inside can't even be opened by the universe. But before we can heal, we must expose. Before we can be free, we must name the pain. Before we can move forward, we need to understand the true origin of the wound that keeps sabotaging your prosperity. So prepare yourself. What comes next won't be comfortable, but it is absolutely necessary. We're about to dig up the deepest roots of this invisible wound that your soul has been carrying. And we'll do it through the eyes of Carl Jung and the sharp edge of truth. Here's the hidden problem and its psychological and philosophical roots. Most people trapped in scarcity believe the problem lies outside of them. They point to a lack of opportunities, an unfair system, absent parents, a difficult childhood, and yes, all of that matters, but it doesn't explain everything. The most paralyzing form of poverty isn't financial, it's spiritual poverty. And that can't be healed with hard work or formulas. It requires something deeper: awareness. Carl Jung understood this more than most. He didn't speak about money, He spoke about psychic integrity. But what few people realize is this: a fragmented soul. A soul divided between who you really are and who you learn to be in order to survive cannot sustain wealth. Because wealth is not just matter, it is identity. And identity is built from emotional roots. If those roots are infected with shame, guilt, or fear, everything you build on top of them will be shaped by those wounds. When you suppressed parts of yourself in order to be liked, to survive, to fit in, you buried your power along with them. And Jung was clear: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Scarcity is not just a circumstance, it's an internal reflection. It's not that you don't have money, it's that on some unconscious level, you don't allow yourself to have it. And here lies the deepest conflict. We'd rather be poor and accepted than rich and rejected. Because from childhood, we were taught that safety equals belonging. And to belong, many of us had to betray ourselves. We had to become what others wanted. We had to be less. We had to be good. And through that process, we learned that shining, standing out, being different was dangerous. Culture reinforced that wound with beliefs like money corrupts, wanting more is greedy, rich people are selfish, suffering makes you more human, being humble means having nothing. These ideas are not harmless, they're like mental viruses, and by repeating them over and over, they embed themselves into your nervous system, into your inner voice, into your way of loving and living. You are not cursed, you are not doomed, but maybe, just maybe, you are carrying a shadow that was never yours to begin with. And now is the time to look at it, not with fear, not with guilt, but with the fierce and loving courage of someone who is ready to reclaim their soul. Carl Jung spoke of something he called herd morality, a collective ethical system not born from individual strength or wisdom, but from the fears and limitations of the powerless. It was a morality designed to keep people small, docile, and within the bounds of sameness. In this system, mediocrity becomes the standard, and anyone who dares to rise above it, who dares to be extraordinary, is met with suspicion, judgment, and alienation. In such a world, excellence itself is treated as a threat. Standing out becomes not an act of courage, but a kind of betrayal. And so, we learn to shrink ourselves, to stay invisible, to conform. The tragedy is that this herd morality doesn't just govern the world around you. It infiltrates your mind. It disguises itself as your own thoughts, your own voice. It becomes that inner whisper that questions every bold step, every moment of self-belief. Who do you think you are? That life isn't for you. You're going to lose everything if you change. It's a voice that sounds like caution, but it's really fear. It sounds like wisdom, but it's really trauma. And worst of all, it doesn't belong to you. It's not your truth. It's your wound speaking. That wound was shaped by experiences where receiving love, attention, or success felt unsafe. It learned that abundance could lead to exposure, that growth could provoke envy or rejection, and that shining brightly could bring isolation or loss. The unconscious absorbed those messages and in turn began to speak through behavior, what Jung called the symbolic language of the psyche. This language doesn't use words. It expresses itself through symptoms, and those symptoms are often misread. Anxiety, even when nothing is wrong. Procrastination, just as you're about to succeed. Self-sabotage at the moment of opportunity. An inability to hold on to joy or achievement. Feeling guilty when good things happen, feeling like you don't belong when life finally gives you what you've asked for. These reactions don't come from who you are. They come from who you were taught to be. At some point, a part of you was programmed to believe that suffering was the currency for love, that to deserve anything good, you had to earn it through pain. And so, you began to repeat that cycle without even realizing it. Suffering became your normal. It became your story. But what if that suffering isn't your true nature? What if it's simply the result of a severed connection between you and your authentic self? Because when you've internalized the idea that struggle makes you morally superior or spiritually pure, then anything that feels easy, joyful, or supportive gets rejected. You don't trust it. You dismiss it. You sabotage it. And now you find yourself stuck in a war between what you desire and what you've been conditioned to believe you deserve. This is the true inner conflict. You long for growth, but a part of you fears that growth will make you unsafe. You crave success, but a hidden part of you sees success as a threat. And that part, whether you see it or not, is fiercely loyal, not to your dreams, but to your old identity, to the parents you wanted to please, to the survival mechanisms you created in childhood, to the version of you that learned how to cope by feeling unworthy. Jung called this phenomenon the identification with the wound. You became so fused with your pain, so bonded to your past, that you started to mistake it for your personality. You protect it, guard it, defend it, because you think letting it go would mean losing yourself. But here is the hardest truth of all. You cannot heal what you continue to justify. You cannot evolve if the wound is still the one driving your decisions. And that wound is clever. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't look like destruction. It looks like hesitation, doubt, excuses. The real blockage is not out there in the world. It's not in your circumstances. It's within you. And until you're willing to face it, until you can look directly into the eyes of the shadow, you will keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. And each time, the cost grows higher. Now that you know where the real problem lies, you're being invited to ask a deeper question. What has this wound cost you? Not just in terms of missed opportunities or unfulfilled dreams, but in your ability to truly live. Let's take a closer look at how this wound has silently shaped the way you see yourself, the choices you make, the life you allow yourself to have. Because what you're about to uncover isn't just insightful, it might change everything. You see, there's something far more dangerous than failure, and it's not what you think. It's comfort. It's the quiet comfort of familiar pain. It's the normalization of struggle. When a wound goes unacknowledged long enough, it doesn't go away. It gets integrated. It becomes part of your internal landscape. And when pain becomes normal, it stops feeling like pain. It becomes identity. And identity is powerful. It governs everything. Once you believe that you are your struggle, that you are your fear, that you are your limitation, then everything in your life starts to align with that belief. You don't need to be visibly broken to be deeply stuck. Sometimes, the most dangerous place to be is in a life that looks fine on the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. A life of routines, obligations, superficial smiles, but no aliveness. That's the most dangerous illusion. The functional life where nothing changes and everything seems okay, but your soul is quietly starving. And the most painful part, it's not that you're being denied abundance, love, or success. It's that you've been conditioned to push it away. The unhealed wound doesn't just block your material blessings. It sabotages your ability to receive anything that expands you. It steals your capacity for joy, intimacy, trust, and growth. And it does this not through dramatic explosions, but through subtle symptoms: hesitation, guilt, disconnection, numbness. These symptoms don't shout. They blend into the background of your existence. They become part of the story you tell yourself about who you are. And eventually, they feel so familiar, so constant, that you stop questioning them. But deep down, something in you knows this isn't how it's meant to be. Life was never supposed to feel like a prison sentence. Your soul was never meant to live in exile from your own power. And the moment you recognize that your inner resistance isn't your enemy, but your oldest wound crying out for your attention, you begin the journey back to yourself. Not the self shaped by fear or survival, but the self that remembers its worth. The self that can receive love without guilt. The self that knows that thriving is not selfish, it's sacred. This is the turning point. Not when you fix the outer world, but when you reclaim your inner one. When you finally see the wound, not as your identity, but as the signal that it's time to come home to who you truly are. First, you become addicted to survival. At first glance, it might seem like you're striving for a better life, pushing yourself to grow, evolve, and improve. But in reality, what's happening deep beneath the surface is that you're trapped in a cycle that never lets you breathe. A cycle where hyperproductivity becomes your identity, where self-demand becomes your compass, and where exhaustion is mistaken for progress. It's a silent trap that disguises itself as ambition, as purpose, as strength. But the truth is, you're not chasing your dreams, you're running from your fears. You see, at some point along your journey, your body learned that being calm was dangerous. It learned that stillness meant vulnerability, that peace was not safety, but exposure. Maybe because in those quiet moments, the things you've buried start to surface. The wounds, the memories, the emptiness. So instead, you run. You run not because you're free, but because you're afraid to stop. And every time you try to rest, anxiety creeps in like an unwelcome visitor, reminding you that silence is a threat, not a refuge. So you keep going. More tasks, more goals, more noise. You stack achievements like armor. You fill your days with deadlines, your nights with obligations, your mind with endless checklists. And yet, with all this movement, there is less and less life. You are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You are present, but not alive. You are efficient, but not fulfilled. You are productive, but you're not at peace. And your soul, your weary, broken soul, no longer knows how to rest in the quiet. It has forgotten how to simply be, without the pressure to perform, or improve, or prove something. It doesn't know how to exist without the constant hum of urgency, without the background noise of needing to do more, be more, achieve more. The silence becomes unbearable because it reveals the void, and in that void, you feel lost. And yet, it is only in that silence where true prosperity can begin to grow. Because real abundance doesn't arrive in the noise. It doesn't thrive in chaos. True prosperity, deep, lasting, soul-level prosperity, only takes root when your inner world is a place of calm, when the silence inside you is not an enemy, but a home, when you can sit with yourself in stillness and feel whole, when the noise outside no longer dictates your worth, and the silence within no longer feels like a battlefield. Only then can you begin to live, not just survive. Only then Can you stop running and start becoming? Not more, but enough. Not faster, but deeper. Not louder, but truer. That's where the real life begins. Second, you lose the ability to receive. This isn't something that happens overnight or something we consciously choose. It's a slow, almost invisible process that unfolds deep within us, often rooted in unresolved pain. People who carry emotional wounds often become givers by nature. They give endlessly. Their love, their time, their energy, even their resources. They pour themselves into others with intensity, with devotion, with a kind of desperation, to be needed, to be accepted, to feel worthy. But when the moment comes for them to receive, when someone offers them kindness, generosity, affection, or even recognition, they shrink, they recoil, they feel awkward, unworthy, out of place. Sometimes they deflect the gesture, downplay it, or even sabotage it entirely. And it doesn't just happen in relationships. At work, they might undermine their own progress, hesitate to speak up, or withdraw from opportunities that could elevate them. They unconsciously push away the very things they desire the most: love, success, support. But why? What's truly happening beneath the surface? Deep down, there's a belief, often hidden even from themselves, that receiving is equivalent to taking advantage, that accepting something good means a debt must follow, a punishment must come. They've internalized a dangerous equation, that pleasure must be paid for with pain, that joy is always the prelude to suffering. This emotional programming doesn't come from nowhere. It's the emotional logic of a wounded child. A child who learned early on that love was conditional, that moments of happiness were short-lived, always followed by disappointment, criticism, or harm. That child, still frightened, still vigilant, still hurting, becomes the invisible force steering the adult's life. Every time something good appears, that inner child pulls the brakes. Be careful, it says. Don't trust it. It won't last. You'll get hurt again. This is why healing and self-awareness are essential if you truly want to evolve. You don't just need a vision board or affirmations. You need to rewire your internal system to receive the reality you say you want. Otherwise, you'll unconsciously repel it, not because you don't deserve it, but because a part of you doesn't believe it's safe to hold. And that part will protect you the only way it knows how, by sabotaging every opportunity that threatens to break the illusion of who you think you are. Transformation begins when you stop asking, "Why am I failing?" and start asking, "What part of me still believes this is dangerous?" Until you shift that belief, you will always find a way to escape the very thing you're chasing, because no one runs faster than the person who's afraid of their own potential. 4. You rewrite your reality to justify scarcity. When you've been trapped for too long in a limited version of yourself, your ego starts to create narratives that help you make sense of it, stories that explain why things aren't working out, why abundance never seems to arrive, and why you feel stuck. The mind clings to these justifications not because they are true, but because they are familiar, and familiarity feels safe even when it's painful. So you start saying things like, "Money isn't everything," or "I'd rather be poor and happy," or "The universe is testing me." You tell yourself, "It's just not my time yet," or "I'm not meant for more." On the surface, these phrases may sound wise or spiritual. They might even hold a grain of truth in certain contexts, but most of the time, they are nothing more than emotional defense mechanisms. Clever ways your subconscious uses to shield your wounds so you don't have to confront them directly. You build this protective wall around your limitations, dressing it up with noble-sounding ideas so you don't have to admit that underneath it all, there's pain. Pain from past failures, rejection, or a sense of unworthiness that's been sitting there, quietly shaping your choices and beliefs. These emotional scars whisper to you every time you try to grow. Stay small. Stay safe. Don't dream too big. Why? Because the moment you truly look within, you risk confronting a truth that might shake the foundation of your identity. The idea that maybe you've been lying to yourself. Maybe you've let fear dictate your life. And that realization can be terrifying. It feels like stepping into the unknown with no map, no guarantee, just vulnerability. It feels like ripping away the only armor you've ever known. But here's what most people don't realize. While looking inward might hurt, living on autopilot hurts more. Waking up every day to a life that doesn't inspire you, that feels like a repetition of yesterday's limitations, that's real suffering. Choosing comfort over growth, denial over truth, wounds over healing. That's what keeps you stuck in a loop of scarcity disguised as humility. And so you keep rewriting your reality. You keep altering the narrative to make your limitations seem acceptable, even noble. You find ways to turn your excuses into philosophies, your doubts into wisdom, your fears into moral values. But deep down, your soul knows the truth. It knows you're meant for more. It knows that those stories are just veils, carefully woven to keep you from remembering your power. You were not born to justify your wounds. You were not meant to settle for a half-lived life. And yet, the longer you repeat these internal scripts, the more real they begin to feel. Scarcity becomes your identity. Lack becomes your comfort zone. And the longer you stay there, the more distant your potential becomes. Not because it's gone, but because you've stopped looking for it. To change your life, you must first change the stories you tell yourself. You must be willing to sit with the discomfort of truth and say, yes, I'm scared. Yes, I've hidden from my own power, but I'm done pretending that this cage is my home. Only then can you begin to write a new reality, one rooted not in fear or excuses, but in the fierce courage to become who you were always meant to be. 5. When the soul is broken, your perception of reality begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways. You no longer experience life as it truly is. Instead, you see it through the fractured lens of your inner world. It's not the external world that changes, it's you. And in that transformation, everything becomes distorted. Opportunities that could have been stepping stones to growth now appear as threats. You no longer recognize open doors. Instead, you question them, doubt them, and in many cases, walk away from them out of fear disguised as caution. The success of others, which could inspire or motivate, instead becomes a mirror of your own perceived failures. Rather than celebrating others' achievements, you feel a quiet competition brewing inside you. You compare, you criticize, you shrink. It's not because you're envious. It's because your inner self has not healed enough to recognize that their light does not dim yours. But the broken soul sees light as a limited resource, something to be protected, fought over, or stolen. And when someone extends a hand to help, the brokenness within you might interpret it as manipulation. Genuine gestures of love or support become suspect. You analyze motives, you assume the worst, you build walls that keep the very healing you crave at a distance. Trust in this state feels impossible. You question sincerity. You become hypervigilant, always waiting for the hidden cost, the unspoken condition, the trap beneath the kindness. Even abundance, something inherently expansive and liberating, begins to feel foreign. It doesn't matter if the universe places blessings directly into your hands. Without the capacity to receive, nurture, and trust what arrives, it all slips away like water through your fingers. A broken soul can't recognize abundance as its birthright. Instead, it sees it as luck, as fleeting, or as something meant for someone else. And so, you self-sabotage. You push it away. You convince yourself you're not ready, not worthy, or simply not capable of sustaining it. This is why no matter how much the universe gives you, be it love, money, opportunities, relationships, peace, if your inner structure is not realigned, if your inner world remains fractured and clouded by past wounds, none of it can last. The mind will find ways to doubt it. The heart will struggle to hold it. And the soul will not feel safe enough to rest in it. Healing, then, becomes not a luxury, but a necessity, because without a deep and conscious reconfiguration of your internal system, your beliefs, your emotions, your patterns, nothing external will feel stable. You will constantly be chasing, grasping, or fearing what you already have. You'll live in a state of survival, even in the presence of abundance. This is one of the most devastating symptoms. You're living beneath your true potential. You settle for what you don't want. You justify a gray, uninspiring life just so you don't make anyone uncomfortable. Carl Jung said that shame is a lie taught to keep us obedient, and as long as you believe that shining is selfish, you'll keep dimming your light so others don't feel uneasy around you. But in that darkness, you're not just hiding, you're losing yourself. These are the invisible consequences of an unhealed wound. They're not punishments, they're reflections. They're the symbolic language of your soul screaming at you, you're not living your truth. That's why you can't sustain abundance. But this isn't where your story ends. Because if you've been able to recognize these consequences, that also means you're capable of changing them. What comes next is the rebellion, a radical path back to yourself, and maybe, for the very first time, toward a real kind of wealth, one that blooms both inside and out. The rebellion begins with liberation. But what if everything you believed was safety was actually a cage? A cage made of sweet but hollow words, of inherited beliefs, of unquestioned fears, of roles you never chose, but play every day as if they were truly yours. Many think that rebellion means breaking everything apart, but it doesn't. Real rebellion starts in silence. It begins the moment you stop repeating what no longer resonates with you. It begins when you consciously decide to see what you once avoided. It begins when you stop being a victim of your past and become the author of your internal reality. Jung reminded us that freedom doesn't come from running away from the darkness. It comes from facing it head-on. And that's exactly what you're going to do now. The first act of rebellion is to name the unnameable. Anything you refuse to name controls you. That's why the first real step toward abundance is to name the wound, not from a place of complaint, not from victimhood, but from brutal awareness, the kind that looks in the mirror and says, "Here is my fear. Here is my shame. Here is what I have not yet healed." As long as you deny it, it will have power. As long as you hide it, it will choose for you. The second act of rebellion is breaking free from unconscious loyalty. Many people remain stuck in scarcity out of loyalty to their parents, their community, their past selves, to a misguided idea of humility or spirituality. But Jung reminded us that growing up often means betraying the expectations of those who didn't dare to evolve. It means honoring your lineage by transcending it. Becoming your best version is not a betrayal. It is an evolution. The third act of rebellion is rewriting your inner narrative. Everything you say to yourself becomes your truth. And if your inner voice is soaked in guilt, fear, or unworthiness, your life will mirror exactly that. Real transformation begins when you start speaking to yourself as someone who is worthy, not from arrogance, but from radical compassion for yourself. Phrases like, "I'm not enough," "That's not for people like me," "I should settle for less." These must be burned to the ground and replaced with new seeds. "I am worthy. I am learning. I can hold what I desire." Not because you've achieved everything already, but because you've finally decided to stop abandoning yourself. The fourth act of rebellion is learning to receive, and this is one of the hardest ones, especially for a wounded soul. Receiving requires vulnerability. It means opening your heart, understanding that pleasure doesn't need to come with pain. It means accepting that life also wants to give to you, not just take from you. Start with the small things. Say thank you for a compliment without deflecting it. Accept help without feeling weak. Celebrate your victories without fearing what others might think. Receiving is a spiritual act. It's a way of telling the universe, "Yes, I'm here. I'm ready." The fifth act of rebellion is reconnecting with your body. Your body holds the emotional memory of every wound. Thinking differently is not enough. You must feel differently too. Walk differently. Breathe slower. Be present in your chest, your back, your belly. Expand your posture. Let the tears flow. Scream if you must. Embrace your shadow physically. Your body is the temple where your soul lives. And if your body is closed, your abundance will be too. The sixth act of rebellion is guarding your energy as if it were gold, because it is. Your attention, your time, your words, these are spiritual currency. If you waste them on complaints, on drama, on comparisons, or on judgments, you'll have no energy left to create what you truly want. A healed soul learns how to say no. No to what drains you. No to what manipulates you. No to what no longer resonates with you. And in that no, a sacred space is born. The space for the yes that changes everything. The seventh act of rebellion is honoring your desire without guilt. Your desire is sacred. It didn't come into this world to be repressed, hidden, or silenced. It came to guide you toward your expansion. Stop believing that to desire is to be selfish. The real selfishness is to deny your soul out of fear of making others uncomfortable. And now you know. Rebellion isn't about chaos. It's about returning home to yourself. It's about breaking the spell of smallness, about opening the gates you once shut, about breathing fully, living loudly, receiving with joy, and walking this earth not as someone broken, but as someone reborn. Carl Jung once said that the individual who dares to be whole, despite being rejected, despite making others uncomfortable, is the one who truly transforms the world. Because they did not come to please, they came to remind others of what they have forgotten about themselves. And that simple truth carries immense power. The path of wholeness is not one of comfort, but of awakening. It is the journey of those who no longer seek validation, who no longer shrink themselves to fit into a mold designed by fear, shame, or conformity. And then something remarkable happens. When you stop begging, you begin to choose. When you stop dimming your light to keep others comfortable, money stops being a source of anxiety. When you choose your soul above all else, life responds. not with fleeting rewards, but with a deep, enduring abundance. Not the kind that comes from surface-level achievement or external applause, but the kind that grows from within, from the roots of your being, from your body, from your emotions, and from an integrated soul that no longer denies any part of itself. Now that the rebellion has begun, this quiet but powerful revolt of the self, there remains only one step, the final revelation, the supreme truth that gives meaning to every chapter of your journey. Prepare yourself, because what comes next has the power to change you forever. The ultimate realization. What if everything you've been seeking out there has always been waiting silently within you? What if prosperity was never meant to be a destination, but a natural result? And not a result of grinding effort, but of deep reconciliation with yourself. For years, you've tried to change your life, but maybe it wasn't your life that needed to change. Maybe it was your relationship with your own wound. That's the uncomfortable truth. Your soul didn't break because of failure. It broke because it was taught that it didn't deserve to receive. And that wound didn't come from weakness. It didn't come from being unworthy. It came from being conditioned to believe that love had to be earned through sacrifice, that life had to hurt in order to have meaning, that dreaming too big was dangerous and reckless. But that programming, that belief system, is not your essence. It's just a mask, an adaptive mechanism you built to survive in an emotionally hostile world. And now that mask is dissolving. And yes, that hurts, but it also liberates. Jung was right. What we deny in ourselves shows up outside as fate. Scarcity is not a punishment. It's a mirror, a reflection of how much you are still denying yourself, of how much you remain bound to a story that no longer defines you, of how many times you've said yes out of fear and no to what you truly deserve. Here is the final revelation. You cannot be rich while remaining loyal to your pain. You cannot be free if your soul is still waiting for permission. You cannot receive the new if you are still clinging to the wounded version of yourself. Because prosperity is not an economic goal. It's a state of openness. It's the energy of someone who no longer needs to hide or pretend or beg for approval. It's the frequency of someone who has embraced themselves fully, with all their shadow, their past, their truth. That is true wealth, to fully inhabit yourself. But such embodiment requires a kind of death, the death of the old narrative, the death of the broken self, the death of the character who has merely survived but never truly lived. And yes, that death is terrifying, because it demands you step out of the familiar, that you walk alone for a while, that you lose approval in order to gain truth. But it is also the most powerful birth you can experience, the birth of the real you, the one who doesn't ask for permission to shine, the one who no longer needs to fit into any structure, the one who chooses the path of the soul over the path of the ego. So what is the final step? It's not doing more. It's not pushing yourself harder. It's not becoming a more productive version of yourself. The final step is remembering who you were before the wound. That child who dreamed without limits, who asked without shame, who laughed without fear of being seen. That part of you still lives. It's still there, waiting for you to return, to look at it with compassion, to whisper, "You no longer need to protect me. I'm ready to live without masks. I'm ready to receive. I'm ready to love. I'm ready to shine without hiding any longer." And when that happens, everything changes. Your energy shifts. Your environment responds. Doors open. Money flows. Not as an end, but as an echo of your deepest truth. Because in the end, what kept you poor was never the lack of resources. It was the separation from yourself. And what will make you rich is not a technique or a formula. It is the reunification of your soul. When your light and your shadow embrace each other, when your past no longer hunts you down, when your heart no longer seeks permission to feel, when you stop running from yourself, life can finally find you. So now, breathe. Feel what you've just remembered. You don't need to understand it all. Just know this: you are not broken. You are awakening. And that is the bravest thing you can do. The rest will come as a result. And maybe, just maybe, it's in the exact moment when you stop running, when you let go of the need to become someone else, when you finally come home to yourself, that abundance at last knows where to find you.